Well, let's go ahead and get started. We still have some people coming, that's great. If I can please have quiet, thank you. For those of you on Zoom, and I think that are probably some more people will be coming in on Zoom, we have the kind of, right, just to remind you, same rules apply in terms of housekeeping, and that is please talk one at a time. If you have a question, that's fine. We will, one or the other of us answering it, will try and repeat the question so that the people at home can hear the question, because sometimes they can't hear when they're back there. So, welcome to session 2 of conservation landscaping. Sue is, why don't you stand up too? So, Sue had, there were a couple of questions that came up last session, and Sue has researched them, so she'll start with some answers to those real quickly.
Okay, so the first question was, I think you asked it. The carbon? Yes, do deep roots sequester carbon? And the answer is yes, they do. All roots sequester carbon temporarily at least. And then when the plant dies, it stays, unless you rip it out, stay in there. Now, deep roots are even better about that.
Yes.
And I found, and I'll just give it to you since you asked. It comes from an organization called NCEA. I don't know what that stands for, but they research environmental issues. And this is from an article they published called "Plants Are Great at Storing CO2. These scientists aim to make them even better." So I will give Lynn this link and she can put it on on the course notes. So this is just a little bit from that article. But yes, so you can be pleased when you grow a deep-rooted plant. Some of that carbon goes way down, and that's what they say in there. You know, it goes, I think they have it stays for millennia. I think goes down here, stays for millennia.
That's a while.
That's a few years. So the next question is a little more difficult. It was I don't remember who asked. They asked, "Are oaks poisonous?" Well, the first correction is for plants we say toxic. I think animals are poisonous. Plants are toxic.
Reptiles can be poisonous.
So all plants make chemicals to defend themselves against their predators. So all plants can be toxic because, like even tomatoes, which we eat, when the Europeans first were introduced to tomatoes, for example, they thought that they were poisonous because they couldn't, and they would have been had we eaten a bushel of tomatoes. You might get sick. So the oaks make tannins specifically for their protection, and you've heard of tannins. So you just probably wouldn't want to eat a lot of oak. However, we do know that they make acorns and that squirrels eat acorns. Sometimes I think that the red oaks have more tannins than the white oaks, and that squirrels overcome this by burying those acorns and leave them for a while. So they don't just hide those acorns, they're actually sort of decontaminating them.
And the Indians, I know from growing up in California, we learned that the Indians used oak acorns, but I believe they boiled them for quite some time,
That's right.
and then they ground them.
For chemical.
Yeah.
And I recently read an article that I cannot find again, where a woman talked about making acorn bread. And she had to do the same thing that you mentioned. She treated those acorns with boiling and roasting and all, and then ultimately she got some acorn flour.
It didn't kill her.
If you live long enough to write this article.
She didn't send it to the FDA for testing.
So that's one of those questions.
And somebody else asked me at Jenna's if we were going to be talking about water.
Shoreline plants.
Thank you.
Shoreline.
Yes. Were you the one who asked?
Yeah.
So
I was one of them, somebody else did too.
Yeah, so the Green Book for the Bay is a good source for that. We, in this particular course that we're doing, we're spending more time today than in past sessions. We've talked about, gone into more depth about bay-wise gardening and what, shoreline solutions, but we're going to be talking more about wildlife in this course, so it's not on the docket for that. And I wanted to I'm gonna go look to see, but it's the Green Book for the Bay.
For the Bay.
Yeah, and it's done by, here's a www.firststopforthebay.org. Firststopforthebay.org, all written together. But I'll see if I can find a PDF of that.
Okay.
I also, did any of you go into the handout folder that I sent you? Good, okay, because there's a handout in there. It's only like 8 pages. It's a PDF of, that pertains to more bay-wise gardening kinds of things, so that might be useful as well. And I think that Sue and I had quite a discussion about this, because she goes, then, conservation landscaping is a thing. I know that. She said, well, it's a thing because there are people that are specializing in that, and they are devoting their careers to that. And I'm not sure if in our class, these are people who are going to be doing that. And I said, yes, but you too can do conservation landscaping, as you saw at Jana Tiernan's house, right? Isn't it amazing what she's done? Now, I don't know, I have a couple rabbits living in my yard. I'm not quite so sure that I consider them now, wildlife, I guess they are, but still. But I think the thing that we really wanted to leave you with as you move forward in your quest with native plants. I know that many of you have used native plants in your gardening, but and you've probably also discovered that the more you get into native plants, the more research you end up needing to do. That's why I created that handbook folder. You can download those and put them on your own computer or print them out. But these are all documents like the one that you were just holding up. This book. The PDF of this book is in there. What you'll find as you go is it's not always quite as simple as going to the garden center and going, oh, that looks pretty. I think that I want this color next to this, so I'll just plant it right there. There can be some questions that you'll learn to ask yourself as you're designing, and we'll be getting a lot more into that next week, because next week is, of course, the session that I have the most fun with, and that is getting started in creating a landscape design using native plants. But what else do we need before we get started?
Let's just remind everyone that Jenna's garden is 16 years old. This is not an overnight project.
That's a really good thing. And I also wanted to mention, I don't know how you would feel about this, but Sue and I live near each other in Easton Club East. And so we've had the wonderful experience of dealing with an HOA that where people want everything nice and neat and a certain way. And so we've worked a lot with our backyards primarily, but and the side yard, the front yard. And my husband shudders every time. Bob, what do you think about? No. But basically, if you would like to see our yards and what we've done with relatively small spaces, you're welcome to come over to my side of town after our class next week. So if you want to allot yourself a little extra time, I'll send out a note in advance and tell you what the address is. And if I don't know if you'll look at your calendar, if you want to too, we can do what we've done in the past, where you just meet up at the parking lot at the clubhouse and then walk from there, because we're not far from there.
Well, and since it's such a big group, we talked about splitting up.
Yeah.
And then just cross.
Half would continue down to my house, and then we'd split, because we both we both are using almost entirely native. You're all, no, mostly,
I have a couple of pesky
yeah.
ground
But
covers.
yeah, so we're mostly native plants in our yards that, it'll give you a chance to get a sense of another type of garden. And our gardens are probably in the 4 to 5 year old range. So some somewhat younger gardens, but we can talk about how they've changed over time and how much time we spent editing to keep some of the things from overtaking.
This is an aside. I was in DC this weekend and walking by the Smithsonian buildings, many of them now, their gardens are all native plants with placards and discussion about it.
Mhm.
And
Isn't that
it's
great?
very lovely.
Yeah, we had a field trip over to the Naval Academy a couple semesters ago, and I noticed that they've been changing over their landscaping to native plants too, around the newer buildings. Can you, Teresa, can you hear us when somebody is talking in the audience? You can't? Okay, good. So that's good to know. Oh, great, thank you. So what I wanted to do today was start off by asking you, what did you take away from Jenna Tiernan's garden? I don't mean, did you go and, do I have to report you for taking place? What were your thoughts on her garden? How could you replicate that? How could you make use of some of her ideas in your own garden? Yes.
Well, I like that she did the little stands of like winterberry and sassafras.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking I could maybe do that in my periphery as an understory, because those trees they don't grow very tall, right?
They're like 20-foot type trees.
Yeah, compared to the big loblollies that we have like surrounding.
Yeah.
They'd be a good thing to, and also, what's the other one that just finished blooming? The pink, the bright pink, or almost triple.
Redbud?
Redbud.
Oh, the redbuds, yeah.
Yeah, is another one.
Right.
I just like when she did those like in little stands of trees,
Yes.
rather than by themselves as a specimen. I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah. You'll see a little bit of that with Mount Cuba too, which is why I decided we should go there with relation to this class, because when they do in their formal gardens, they use native shrubs very effectively, because they take the flowering native shrubs and they plant them in groupings so that you see white here and pink there and that type of a thing.
Yeah.
So anytime you have more than one, it becomes a stand or it's a grouping sort of, like I always got plants, either 3 of them or 5 of them or sometimes more. Yeah. That's a great observation. Anything else?
I like that she used that coral honeysuckle as a ground cover.
Uh-huh. Wasn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
That was neat.
Yes. You'll see if you go over to my garden, you'll see that I have one climbing up what is a dead tree, about yay high, and it's kind of overwhelming it now. It looks like a big old huge popsicle. But I have a bird nesting in there, so I can't trim it. So it's driving me crazy. But yes, I thought that was a great idea too. What else?
I got some oak leaf hydrangeas this week because I'm not too sure in our neighborhood how people would love it if I got too carried away with my garden, but I can plant something like that along the edge without anybody even noticing. And
Then you can plant other things where you can see them.
yeah, and they also kind of then block the air conditioner in my neighbor's house. I can plant them on my side of the property line, but I'm providing something for the birds.
And weren't those oak leaf hydrangeas beautiful?
They're
I just I love their leaves, and their flowers are very nice too. So that's nice. What else? Annabelle, what were your thoughts after you left?
Well, like the other person, I like the ground cover, because I've been looking for a good ground cover, and what I've got in that space now is terrible. And I'm thinking I may go to that.
She did also show us she had that small shrub that's like what I'm installing next week.
The Grollo?
Yeah, it's a Grollo.
A little sumac.
No, not the sumac. Sumac is kind of interesting though too, as a ground cover. It has I want to say it's something, sorry. Yeah, but it will develop berries. It's blooming right now.
Aronia.
Aronia, that's it.
Yes.
Yes, aronia. And it's a low-grow version of aronia. So it gets to 2 feet high. And it's really nice because it's right now it's blooming. It'll get berries. And then in the fall, it has beautiful leaves. So I'm using that well, you'll see it. I'm doing some redesigning, but I specifically wanted it to be, remember the discussion about if you want to replicate nature, you need to let's say you want to make your grass a path between a couple sections of your garden. It's as a way of getting rid of some of the overwhelming huge patch of grass. So then you've got a bed, but you don't want to just suddenly jump into trees. You want to provide something low, and then you want your under storage, the red bud or some other small trees, and then it goes back into the larger trees. So that's a concept of conservation landscaping, because then it provides everything that a variety of different animals and birds, birds are an mammal, need. So they can hide in there, they can find nesting material, they can find food. Oftentimes big oak leaves will collect water, so they'll get water there. So are you ready to start? Any other comments from your field trip? Question?
This is not exactly from the field trip, but a friend of mine told me today that somebody, and she's not sure who did this, came to her yard and did an evaluation of her yard, and then gave her like a certificate.
It's a Baywise certification.
Yeah, how do you get that?
You go through. In the
It's in the
handout.
stuff?
It's in the handout folder.
Okay.
There's a Baywise pamphlet. That's that PDF. You need to call Michaela Bowling out at the county offices, and she'll schedule it.
Okay.
It's the master gardeners who do this.
Okay.
And next week I can put in a short thing about it. They use like a measuring stick. Are you doing this? Are you doing this? And
I mean, that would be a helpful way of starting out, right?
yeah, and it's also good because you get a sign that helps, so that let's say you live in a community like down in Easton downtown, where it's okay to have a sign up. You can't have a sign in our development, but you can have that sign there, and people go, oh, what is that? Tell me more about that. And it gives you a chance while you're out there in your garden and people are walking by, you could talk to them and educate them a little bit. So let's get started. Good. You get to listen to my creaky bones. So today, last week we talked about why natives, and we were talking about why planting natives is important, and getting started with a home landscape, with problems and native solutions. I don't know if we did talk about that. And then we have the field trip to Jen and Tiernan's, which I'm so glad we did, because I just thought her place was fabulous. This week, we'll be talking about attracting birds and pollinators to your garden. And that we'll start in getting to that. We'll start by talking about reminding everybody of the need for diversity and why we would want to be doing this. And then we'll be showing you matchups between native plants and the birds and bees that they support. One of the videos that I'll be showing today will be talking about picking plant material that supports the caterpillars and insects of the birds that you want to attract to your home. So for people who really, really want to start getting into this, that becomes a fabulous way of keeping your mind busy and researching. Anyone who has taken Wayne Bell's birding classes will understand that if you want to bring birds to your, a wider variety of birds to your yard, they've got to have there are certain basics they have to have. We'll talk about that. Next week, we'll be getting started with the conservation landscape plan. And we'll be talking, we'll go into a little more depth of one of the really great things about native plants and is how happy they are when you're not bugging them. So they we'll talk about the basics of upkeep from spring to summer, fall, winter. And we'll have that, of course, we'll be doing that field trip to Mount Cuba. Has everyone who wanted to go to Mount Cuba signed up yet?
Yeah.
So if you're going to, please do so quickly because I'm going to have to close it out so that I can give them the numbers and they'll invoice us.
Is this by bus?
No, we're carpooling.
Oh, I like that better.
Yeah.
Too much on buses.
I know, and I think we carpooled last time and it was so much fun because
Oh, okay. That makes
then
a big
people
difference.
got in cars with other people who like gardening and chit chat. I was driving and let me tell you, we got there so fast.
Where is Mount Cuba?
It's up near Hockessin in Delaware, so it's a pretty easy drive. So we went on a Friday last time as well, and coming back, we didn't hit any traffic going that route, so it was pretty nice.
And this is May 5th.
Yes, it's next Friday.
Okay.
Well, not this coming Friday, but a week from Friday.
Okay.
Okay, so we already talked, oh gosh, I got behind, didn't I? We already talked about Jenna's landscape. This is what our landscape looked like in the winter, by the way. So to start off we'll be talking a little bit about diversity. Yeah, you're jumping the gun. My partner in crime here is jumping the gun again. So here's the question for you. Why do we humans need other forms of life? So there's one totally correct answer here. We don't. We need biodiversity in order to exploit it, like new medicines. We need biodiversity should be preserved because there's no justification for our destruction of other species. Or we need biodiversity because it literally sustains us. Number 4, wow, you guys, that's great, because it really does. One of the things that, I think I mentioned it last session, the last time I was out in California, I saw that a lot of the vineyards were planting native plants and flowers along, some of them down through the rows, but a lot of them along the edges to attract bees. And just think what a pickle would be in if we did not have any bees left to be able to pollinate everything that we consider of value for eating and our food. It's very important. So when we use introduced species, like the crepe myrtle, little crepe myrtle tree is in front of my house that I don't have a heart to cut down. Besides, they always come back. They compete with natives for a lot of things, but it's easy to imagine that they compete for light, water, and nutrients. They also cause a displacement of natives. And when they get outside of your yard, which goes into the category of being invasive, then that really becomes a problem. You know that little park along Oxford Road where every year they have to go in and they do constant mowing to keep the invasives down, and now the Bradford pear has just, they run amok, and so now they have to go in, they chop them down continually, but they keep coming back, and that's what you deal with when certain species get out of control. The problem is that these ornamentals that come in from other countries, specific, that usually it's another country, sometimes it's another zone, but it's usually another country, and they're being brought in because they're pest-free. Because people in the their garden, they don't want any damage done to their leaves, and they want everything to be perfect. Well, the problem is that they become invasive because they don't support any insects, and so nothing ever bothers them. The example that they gave here was that the European genotype of a plant might support 170 insects in Europe, but only 5 here in this country. And why is that? It's because they didn't grow up together. So that's why it's so important then you're looking at your area to keep your native plants to pretty much your area. When we go up into Mount Cuba, there'll be plants there, and I've actually used some of their plants, and they've thrived in my garden here. But you have to be careful because you can also find plants that come into nurseries that are coming in from quite a few states away, and they may not be as successful at being able to survive in our environment here. Most insects are specialists, and the best example of that, and the most obvious one, is the monarch, because we all know that the monarch butterfly requires the thank you. I lost the word from that. It went up here someplace. That requires a milkweed, and it's not that you won't see a monarch butterfly on other flowers, because you do. I got into this argument with my sister-in-law. Yeah, but they're going over there, but they won't put their eggs anywhere but on a milkweed. And the only plant that monarch caterpillar can eat is a milkweed. So if you don't have milkweeds in your garden, you're not going to have any monarch caterpillars in your garden as well. I have a neighbor between you and me. She had one day she went out in her garden. She had put in a bunch of swamp milkweed plants that year, and when she went out there and she found 5 caterpillars all in one place, and was so excited. Yes, that was really cool. I found some and I decided, well, I should leave them because I don't want to disrupt nature. And the next morning they were all gone. What do you want to bet? Some birds found them. So that's life. So here's your cue.
I could stand up now.
You can stand up now.
Okay, so this is a book, and what's your name? Lynn. Put a PDF of this in
In a folder.
on the folder. And it's good reading, but I'm going to give you just a short comment or two about each of the 8 principles. So the first one is to design for the environment. Well, that's a big statement. And so the one point I want to make about that is think of landscape design as an ongoing process. And Lynn likes to use the word editing, so she's always going into her garden, changing what needs to be changed. And in nature, it's an ongoing process. So you, in addition to designing your landscape, you also have to plan for maintenance, which is, kind of a dirty word in landscape. You want to it's not a do it and be done.
Well, even the best designers will go back and the next year and discover what didn't work, and they will redesign. They'll move that plant from where they put it and put it in another, put the group of them in another section where they will be more appropriate.
So that's why 1 and 8 really go together, and then the details are in between. So the second one, use locally native plants. Well, this theme gets echoed again and again and again. It's the native plants that will do the best. And I can't say all the things, but I did want to mention about cultivars, because Lynn has already mentioned hybrids. Cultivars, and I'm going to use one example, and I think it's zinnias. Zinnias are a petaled flower. They have a nice big center where the nectar is. But breeders have said, oh, it's the petals that are beautiful. And they've developed zinnia cultivars that have more petals and less middle part. And the middle part is what sustains the insects and the butterflies and the bees, not the petals. So this is where trying to please people can ultimately harm the landscape. The other point I wanted to mention was about climate change. We all know that climate is changing, but that does not mean that you shouldn't plant natives for the current climate, because the more natives you put in there now, the better chance they have of evolving on their own to meet the coming conditions. So don't just abandon a plant because it's adapted to cooler temperatures. It will, you want to kind of almost become a scientist and force the seeds to be better and better. So let's see, what was the third one? Invasive plants. Oh. There's so many. So much of what people plant, well, they aren't necessarily invasives, but they are not helpful either. But I did want to mention one invasive that just makes my skin crawl, and that's Nandina, which seems to be everywhere. And it looks tidy, but you know what one of its other names is heavenly bamboo, and we all know how awful bamboo can be. And that's a perfect name for it because it's like that. And it's also, we mentioned chemicals earlier, the Nandina, the berries of the Nandina contain a toxin. I don't remember if it's cyanide or strychnine, but it's something that you see in a murder mystery. So, and birds,
They're toxic to birds.
they're toxic to birds, and most birds will eat a few berries and they'll be okay. But some birds, like robins and cedar waxwings, will come onto the plant in bunches and eat all those berries and become sick or die. So that's a good reason to get rid of any nandinas you have. And they are somewhat invasive because the birds that do eat them and then go spread their seeds around will plant more nandinas. And they also have runners, yes. Yes.
Those things.
So let's see, what else do I want to mention? And, yeah.
You're gonna be
Oh,
talking
I
about
was going to say, one item. So another plant that is native, but it is maybe invasive isn't the right word, but I was going to mention that Lynn and I both have goldenrod, which is a wonderful native plant, but it's also very
Oh,
hardy,
my gosh.
and it will go everywhere. So,
I think they call it prolific.
prolific,
If that's being nice. So, yes,
aggressive, that was the word, aggressive.
and because they send the rise,
They
they,
have rhizomes.
yeah, they go underground. And so all of a sudden, like, you'll find them everywhere in your garden.
Yeah.
That's what I'm busy editing.
Totally unexpected places.
Yes.
We find goldenrod. And it's a wonderful plant, but, enough is enough.
Yeah, no, you do make mistakes though, is when you garden. And one year, it's a little off the subject, sorry. But one year we went out to one of the nurseries and we were looking at milkweeds. And they had this milkweed that they were calling common milkweed, that it was kind of flattish and it had rounder leaves than what you normally see on milkweeds. I thought, oh, that's really pretty, I like that. So I got a bunch of them and I planted them. It was dog bane.
Oh, God.
Oh, I know. Oh my gosh, just try and get rid of dog bane. I've been out there pulling it out all for the last 2 weeks. But then all of a sudden I realized, I had common milkweed here couple common milkweeds back in here last year. And I was real careful to shake the seed pods so that I would get more of them. And I'm going, oh, I hope I would, I think I was pulling up common milkweed, the real guy too. And then I saw some when I was out at what's the name of that nursery that I went to over the weekend?
Unity?
Yeah, the Unity nursery out in Churchill. They're now specializing in native plants, and you can buy plugs from them, which is really cool. Much cheaper than having to buy, and plugs with native plants work great. Within a month, you will never know. But anyway, I was looking at this, I said, is that common milkweed or is that, and she said, no, dog bane is thinner, and I go, oh good, I didn't destroy all of the milkweeds. But, and the dog bane has a reddish tinge stem. but it comes up the same way. They just come up straight up. And they were very aggressive. They were getting in the lawn. But they were getting mowed over every week, so they didn't do anything and they finally gave up, but I think. But anyway, so
So one
aggressive is a nice way to say it.
And one little piece of trivia, because I wondered about this for years. We call things like milkweed, that gives it a kind of a bad connotation. But the word weed comes from the word wart, which, and I know there's other things with the word wart on the end, and it's just an early English word for a herbaceous plant. Okay.
Oh, interesting.
You could say milkwort.
Huh. Well, my mom used to be involved with the California Native Plant Society and doing all kinds of stuff. She loved to go out in the woods and identify native plants. And I remember her telling me, Lynn, it's not a weed unless you don't want it. It's a native plant. So we try to be a little bit more organic to our discovery of.
So as habitat, Lynn already mentioned this, but habitat, most birds and animals like dense foliage. That's why Lynn already mentioned you plant things in groups, and I think you pointed out that that's what was attractive even at Jenna's place, is that you don't, I mean, a big grand tree in the middle of your yard is impressive, but it's not natural. You don't see that in the forest.
Right.
So you want to have, and the little creatures like we have skinks and lizards that hang out near our compost pile. They're just adorable.
The snakes?
Those skinks.
Oh.
Snakes, if I had one, I'd be adorable. So let's see, 5. Air quality. When I first saw that, I figured there's nothing we can do about air quality. But I realized after reading this,
Oh, yeah, there is.
yeah, this, whenever you have a gas-powered machine, a tool of any kind, you're polluting the air. And
That's why they have so many initiatives to plant more trees.
and when you put chemicals on your lawn or your plants, they don't stay all on your lawn or plants. They become part of the air or on your plant.
Or the day.
Or the day, if they wash off.
Yes.
The water's next, I think.
That's why around here, the professionals who are putting things on your lawn, they have to follow rigorous regulations. But nothing keeps the homeowner from going out and buying the same thing on Amazon or something and putting it in at the wrong time.
And another small thing about air quality is don't have bare dirt, because then you get dust and all the little things that are in dust. So it's a fairly easy thing to do. It's just keep your bare dirt covered, either with plants or with mulch. Or lawn if you have to.
Although you do need some bare dirt in some parts of your garden, because that's how the bees overwinter.
Overwinter, right, yes. Doesn't keep the air going. So clean water, this is a particularly sensitive around here, near the bay. So for many of us, that means runoff, and that is my biggest problem, is runoff. I think the best way to address that is if I just had more plants to absorb the water, that wouldn't run off. But then there's the driveway, and, so it's a constant issue. But you could try to at least have any water that's coming off your property to be clean water. Don't have it full of pesticides and herbs. Okay. I got the word from the boss here.
Yeah, I just looked at the clock.
So the last one, and I'm not going to talk about 8 because it's just the experience. The last one, soil, is one of my favorites, and we'll talk about this next week some more. But first sentence, healthy plants begin with healthy soil. So that's where it all starts, is with the soil. So
And it doesn't mean that if you have a lot of clay soil or sandy soil and it looks inert to you, it does not mean that there's anything wrong with it. So
that's just what it is.
yeah.
And compaction, as Lynn has pointed out, That's one of the big bugaboos, but every time you build something big, you're gonna get soil compaction.
Well, yeah, and that's another good reason sometimes to be careful going around into into parts of your garden before spring has really sprung, because you can start compacting things and making it difficult for the seedlings to come up.
And one more point, and I've heard this before, don't try to micromanage your conditions. If your pH, if your natural area pH is a little bit low, you don't need to correct it because it won't last anyhow. If you put lime on your soil, unless you're a farmer, it's gonna change. It's gonna be back to what it would normally
Eventually.
be. So I'm gonna stop now.
So let's get started with our, oh, wait, there we go. Now, I have to get my cursor over to the right. There.
I'm going to call this Bring Nature Home maybe 2.0. It's an update. We've learned a lot. I wrote the original book and wrote it in 2005. It was published in 2007. So we've learned a lot since then. And this should be an update. But before I talk about Bringing Nature Home, I want to talk about E.O. Wilson's book in 2016 called Half Earth. Of course, many of you know that Edward O. Wilson died the day after Christmas. Huge loss to the world of conservation. But he was 92 and he spent a lifetime giving it his all. And one of the things he worried about the most, of course, was protecting biodiversity. We've got a biodiversity crisis in this planet and he wanted to fix it. So he wrote this book, Half Earth, Our Planet's Fight for Life. And his message was clear. We need to save functional ecosystems. We need to save nature on half of planet Earth if we're going to have it on any of planet Earth. He spent most of the book talking about the science that supports that statement. And then he pretty much ended the book. He didn't tell us a lot about how we could do that. So people are scratching their heads. I mean, conservation biologists love the idea. Gee, let's put half the Earth aside and everything will be great. But half of planet Earth is already in some form of agriculture. Half of the terrestrial Earth is in agriculture. The other half has almost 8 billion people and all of our airports and roads and detritus. And we don't have a third half to put aside for nature. So how can we do what E.O. says we should do? Well, that's what I want to talk about today. I think we can realize E.O. Wilson's dream. We're going to need a new approach to conservation to do that, though. I could talk all day, all week, all year about nature-specialized relationships. Point I want to make today, though, is that these relationships, nature itself, is on the ropes. And it's on the ropes because we did not take Teddy Roosevelt's advice. Way back in 1908, Teddy heard that the state of Arizona was going to mine the Grand Canyon. So he went to the canyon, looked out over the edge, and he said, leave it as it is. I mean, those 5 words, he started the process of creating the Grand Canyon National Park. Well, we didn't leave it as it was. It's only about 5% of the lower 48 states that's anything close to its original pristine ecological state. And that's because we have logged the country repeatedly. We have tilled it, we have drained it, we have grazed it. We've got 770 million acres of rangeland in the US. That's 4.5 times the size of Texas. And of course, we've paved it or otherwise developed it. We have straightened our rivers and dammed them. And you can spell that any way you want. We have polluted our skies and changed our climate for centuries to come. We've drained our aquifers. We've introduced more than 3,300 species of plants from other continents, many of which are running amok in our natural areas like kudzu's doing here. In short, we have carved up those natural areas into tiny remnants of their former selves. And each one of those remnants is too small and too isolated to sustain the species that run the ecosystems that we all depend on. You might wonder why we've done this. I wonder why we've done this. And I don't know, but I suspect we thought that our nest, planet Earth, was so big we could foul it forever and there wouldn't be any consequences. Of course, we were wrong about that, and that's why we're seeing some pretty scary headlines these days, like the insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Talking about global insect decline. Followed by this one, North America's lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last 50 years. That's almost 1/3 of our North American bird population already gone. Now the UN says, well, you know, we're going to lose 1 million species to extinction probably in the next 20 years. I don't know if you heard, but 2 months ago, we removed 23 species from the endangered species list, not because we've saved them, but because they're already extinct. So this is happening, but we can't allow it to happen. It's not an option to lose the species that keep us alive on planet Earth. So I could go on talking about the pox that we humans have delivered upon the environment, thus upon all of our houses, but that is not what this talk is about. This talk is about a cure for that pox. It's a cure that'll take small efforts from lots of people, but those efforts will deliver enormous physical, psychological, and environmental benefits to everybody. Let's return to this headline briefly. The insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Well, again, E.O. Wilson told us what it would mean if we were to lose insects, and he did it way back in 1987 with this paper, The Little Things That Run the World. And again, his message was clear. Life as we know it depends on insects. And if they were to disappear, so would most of our flowering plants. And if most of our flowering plants disappeared, that would so drastically change energy flow through our terrestrial ecosystems that the food webs that support our animals, the amphibians, the reptiles, the birds, the mammals, even many of our freshwater fish, those food webs would collapse and the animals would disappear. The biosphere, the living portion of the earth, would rot because we would have lost insect decomposers that rapidly turn over nutrients, and all we would have is bacteria and fungi. And of course, humans wouldn't survive any of those drastic changes. There's some good news here, believe it or not, and that is this doesn't have to happen. We can save our insects, we can save our birds, we can save nature itself. But we're going to have to change the way we landscape to do it. And we're going to have to change the way we landscape pretty soon.
So remember last week we talked about biofragmentation? One of the things that I wanted to point out is when you look at this chart here, this would be this is where life is when in a more natural state. And this is on the far right of that chart is where it is around our homes typically, or around in a city or even a suburban type of environment. It goes way, way, way down. Now this particular chart, I'm sure it must have had some better colors or something, but it's hard to see those in here, but that would be, I think this gray one is probably the birds all the way down to there. And part of that is what happens with the fragmentation, when we take away those corridors. And we've done that, a great example of that is what we've done with the way we designed some of our more I want to say suburban neighborhoods, like Easton Club or Easton Club East, or out there, it's most likely going to happen out there in Trapp as well. You know, when you start building these big developments of, 500 homes, and their idea of landscaping is what they call a pocket park, but it's all landscaped with trees, the typical ornamental types of things, then there is no way I don't know if all of you have ever been out towards Easton Club East, but there's a creek that runs behind that property and all the way down to behind where the dealership is. It crosses Dutton's Lane and then continues out behind where the ROFO is. Well, that creek also goes behind where that new development is going to be, and behind Easton Club East, and goes out towards the forest, the Seth Forest, which is basically an experimental forest. And the idea has always been that you've got this whole creek bed that's protected, and so it's got some of its natural trees and shrubs and all that still, but it's not quite enough. But what Doug Ptolemy proposes is that when you look at all of the land that's privately owned, much of that would be farmland, but much of it is also homes. If people started converting those big lawnscapes into landscapes that are done with native plants, then there's a better chance of connecting those corridors. So basically, if you'll remember what I talked about last week, where you've got the, where you have over here where they're talking about interior and edge species. Well, what happens when you break that up is you increase the amount of edge and decrease the amount of interior, which is where wildlife is protected. We see that out in, and I think I mentioned this last week too. We see that as what used to be pasture land, for example, and the edges were perfect habitat for bobwhites. But then they stopped grazing the horses and they left it, and they started mowing it, and now all of a sudden the foxes can get to where the bobwhite eggs and the bobwhites themselves. But it's the perfect example of that. And up to the right, they're talking about if we can connect fragmented habitat, new species will come. And there are actually studies that are showing that that is true. It just takes time. It's not something that happens overnight. We've just done too much damage when we've created our idea of a place to live, and that place to live doesn't include the inhabitants that were there. So when we look at the need to reduce habitat loss and degradation, in North America, we've seen a staggering loss of birds. A 2019 study led by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology found that 3 billion fewer breeding birds were in existence compared to 1970. That's less than, what is that? Is that 30 years, not even 30 years. To put that into context, we've lost roughly 1 in 4 birds over the course of my parents' lifetime. 1 in 4 bird species. More than 90% of these losses are of common birds like sparrows, blackbirds, and finches. Birds can serve as indicator species. Remember the old go into the mine shaft and have your bird tell you whether there's a problem? Well, the birds are telling us there's a problem. And I'm not a diehard environmentalist, but I think that this is something that we do need to pay attention to. It's pointing out that the health of our ecosystem is dwindling, and using native plants can help. It can be our part to help. So plant choice to support pollinators and birds. Well, I think you could say that a bird is a pollinator. But anyway, so here we're going to continue real quickly with the continuation of Doug's program.
So designing landscapes like this that destroy the production of ecosystem services is just not a good idea. Never was a good idea, but today it's a terrible idea. We've got almost 8 billion people on the planet. We need more ecosystem services today just to keep the people happy without wiping out everything else than ever before. Now we do have parks and we have preserves, and people, why isn't that enough? Because, if it was enough, we wouldn't be in the 6th great extinction event right now. So we now have to do conservation outside of parks and preserves. In other words, we've got to find ways for nature to thrive in human-dominated landscapes. Not hang on by a thread, but thrive. Where are we going to do that? Let's go back to private property. Most of the land is privately owned. We can't ignore it. 85.6% of the U.S. east of the Mississippi is privately owned. 98% or 95, I forget, of Texas is privately owned. 78% of the entire country is privately owned. Again, if we don't do conservation on private property, we're going to fail. Well, this is where the specialization comes in. 90% of the insects that eat plants are host plant specialists. Every plant lineage that's out there protects itself with a unique cocktail of chemical defenses. And an insect can't adapt to all of them. So they pick 1 or 2 plant lineages that are really similar in how they protect themselves. And they develop the adaptations necessary to circumvent those defenses. The enzymes that allow them to store and excrete and detoxify those compounds. The behavioral adaptations and life history adaptations that minimize insects' exposure to those compounds. But it takes a long period of evolutionary history with the plant lineage for all those adaptations to fall into place. And once they do, the insect's locked into eating that plant. So if you take out the milkweeds from your yard and put in hostas, the monarch's not going to start to eat your hostas. Can't do it. It's locked in to milkweeds. And that's why when we landscape with plants from Asia or South America or someplace else, we are destroying the local food web because most of our insects cannot eat most of those plants. And if those plants escape our gardens, become serious invasive species, and 86% of our woody invasive species in this country are escapees from our gardens, then we're destroying the food webs out in nature as well. So all I'm saying here is that plant choice matters. If we are trying to rebuild functional food webs, rebuild ecosystems, share our landscapes with nature, we're going to have to choose the right plants or it's not going to work.
So native birds and native plants are symbiotic, right? So the birds require the bugs that the plants support, as well as the berries and seeds. One of the things that we have a short list here of that. When we talk about, there are 4 trees that support the highest number of butterfly and moth species. For example, that would be birches, like your river birch, cherries, oaks, any kind of oak. But I think most of the studying has been done with white oak.
Any of it's good.
And then willows. And then there are 5 berry producing shrubs and vines for local birds that are especially helpful, and that would be 3 of them are dogwoods: gray dogwood, red osier dogwood, silky dogwood, and then the southern arrowwood and the Virginia creeper. So those are all common names that are good ones to look for and include in your garden. Almost, oh, I see that, I can use that. So, but it's important to remember that not all natives support in the same way. Northern bayberry, for example, and eastern red cedar they produce berries that are very high in fat, but they're only a handful of species will eat them. But they're good species. Like, for example, I would love to get some of those, oh gosh, I just forgot what the bird is that likes the bayberry. And I remember that Jenna she was talking about in her first session that she was getting them, I'll think of it.
Cedar wax?
Huh?
Cedar wax?
Yes, the cedar waxwings, because I really miss those birds. I used to see them all the time where I grew up, and I don't see them around here, but I don't have big berries. Do you get them on your winter berry?
Occasionally, yeah. But they always come in flocks. Yes, they do. We have a very old, golly Dave, what is it? It's a crabapple.
Oh,
Yeah, really old. It's not in my yard, but it's in the neighborhood. And when they come, you're right, they're just all over the tree, talking and eating.
do they eat the crab apples?
Yeah, the crabapples have seeds in them.
Oh,
Are you
interesting.
talking about cedar waxwings? Yes. This is just an aside, but Jim Wilson, who many of you know as a birder, he says that the song of the cedar waxwing is tiny mice snoring.
Tiny mice snoring, tiny mice snoring.
Bees, bees, bees.
These birders, they always come up with weird things like that. So, but the waxy berries persist into the winter and provide a food source for the overwintering songbirds. So there are a lot of different uses for the native plants, regardless of the type of berry that they're producing. So we just talked about some of them, but here's the proof in the pudding. So when you look over here, let's see if I can make this work. Up there. Look in this column for the number of Lepidoptera. That's the caterpillars, and yeah, basically caterpillars that are supported. So your oaks, the whole genus of oaks. So that would be your red oaks, your scarlet oaks, your white oaks, your black oaks. They support 534 different species. Then you compare that to the prunus, which is the black cherry, 456, not that far behind. the willow 455, and the birch 413. Then you go over to the perennials. Now perennials are smaller, so they don't really, and they're not supporting as much. But the goldenrod, the whole genus, those it's supporting 115, and the asters are supporting 112. And then it drops down significantly after that, down into the 40s and then the 20s and then nothing. So look, and milkweed is a specialist. So you've got milkweed down here and it supports 12 different types of species, but it's very specialized in terms of what it's supporting mainly. And so you see the proof of that, that it doesn't support that many different species. So planting with natives, at the end of the day, provides for greater diversity, substantial root systems that help support that help break up your clay, that help support your plantings when they're on a slope. The quality and aesthetics that you want in any kind of a garden, as long as you know what you're planting and when they're going to be blooming and what color the blooms are, you'll be very rewarded because almost all of the native plants have some sort of a bloom. They reduce the monoculture that you get when you've got too many of the ornamentals in your yard, and they increase the habitat with food and wildlife cover. So in my book, what I go back to is the whole idea of what Doug Tallamy says, garden as if your life depends on it. And we have the power to preserve that. He has also been a really strong proponent in home gardens and what home gardens can do in terms of correcting some of the deficiencies that we have created. But here's some keystone plants that can basically change the planet. They change more, they change this, let's see, if I don't have a listing of these. Keystone, it just says, we will look at keystone plants, but the keystone plants are the ones that we just talked about that support the greatest numbers of caterpillars and bugs. And why is that important? Because that's what the birds need. That's what some of the other animals in your garden are also looking for. They provide this. They build a home for the butterflies and the moths. The best bird feeders are nature's bird feeders. And I have, over the years, I have spent, I don't know how much money on bird seed. And I rarely feed the birds anymore. My bird feeders are empty except for suet. And mainly because I keep the leaves on the ground and over winter, and those leaves are still there. And where are the birds? The birds are out there pecking around in those seeds and that they're finding in the ground at about this time of year. Now later in the summer, I might start feeding them again, especially now that I think I've counted 4 nests around my yard right now. I had 7 last year, so I'll probably be seeing some more that somebody's just hidden them from me. I haven't found them yet. In fact, I was working yesterday. I was out working in my little mini meadow, and there's a little box up there. It's for the bluebirds, but all of a sudden something came rushing out over my head. I go, oh, there must be a bird nesting in there now. But I hadn't seen it yet, but apparently I got too close. It happened again when I was trying to clip that vine, and the robin came out madder than a wet ham.
Lynn, can we go back one slide, please?
Sure.
Okay, what was it I wanted to mention? Maybe it was the one before that. Okay, studies show that wildlife gardening can double wildlife presence within one season. That's encouraging.
It is, isn't it?
Yes,
And I
it
think that's my point when I mentioned that when I started planting more native plants around my house, that's when all of a sudden, wow, 7 nests. So, and a lot of birds have more than one clutch, right? Is that the? Yeah, have more than one clutch in a year. So yeah, some of them are sparrows, some are robins, kind of boring. but they're still providing a place for them to nest, and obviously they wouldn't be nesting there if there wasn't food for them, because they need a lot of food to raise those young. I hear the young out there all the time. So one group have already left because I'm not hearing them now, and they were noisy. They were grumpy. The mom wasn't feeding them enough, I think.
Could we go back to the last one for a minute? Thanks. Wildlife in greater numbers. Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. That was Teresa. I recognized the voice.
Yes.
She's hiding. So basically, and then there's soil down there. That's for you for our next class. The soil maiden. So the solution is simple, and it's really not that simple, but it is simple, and that is that if we plant more native plants, go tell that to my husband next time I go to a nursery. He goes, ah. So part of this goes back to creating pollinator habitat gardens. You know, when you look at this right here, do you recognize some of those plants? See, I see the no, it's Anna's hyssop.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, I love those plants. And then over here to the side, I mean, but isn't that just beautiful? It's gorgeous.
Is that goldenrod in the back?
No. Oh, wait, no, those look like,
Black eyed Susan.
yeah, they look like a black-eyed Susan. I'm not sure what the grass is they have in the back.
What is the white flower?
I know what that is, and I can't think of, I have some in my garden that's just come up, and I recognize the leaf. It's, but but it's so pretty combined, isn't it? And what I love about those, the purple plant, the Anastasia, that blooms prolifically, and it changes. So it'll start off being a real pretty purple, and then as it goes into the fall, it starts brown, shade, the shade diminishes a little bit, and then as it gets close to winter, it turns brown, but it still has this interesting vertical interest.
Anna's hyssop.
Okay. Do you remember what the common name is for it?
Anna's hyssop.
Or is that a common name? I can't
It
remember.
probably has one.
Yeah. So I think this is the last of Doug Ptolemy's video.
I'm going to give you 3 examples of how well it does work when we do choose the right plants, starting with our house right here in Oxford, Pennsylvania. This is where Cindy and I moved in the year 2000. We got a piece of a farm that was broken up, had been farmed for a long time, almost 300 years. The last thing they did before they broke it up was mow it for hay. So very, very few plants there, certainly very few woody plants there. So our goal was to restore the functional ecosystem that should have been here. This is what our house looks like today, actually in the summertime. Got a little lawn here, we're very traditional, but we've added a lot of plants. And right away I noticed as soon as I started planting native plants, a lot of organisms, particularly those caterpillars, came to our house. We've since learned that if you want to measure the quality of your food web, you simply count the caterpillar species. And that's what I've been doing for the last 4 years, taking pictures of them. And I am up to 1,140 species of moths recorded at our house. Now we've got 10 acres. That's, Pennsylvania is 2.4 million acres. So on 1/240,000th of the landmass, we're supporting 44% of all the moth species that occur in Pennsylvania. And because so many of these are types of bird food, we have recorded 60 species of birds that have bred on our 10 acres, not flew by, but bred. But I know what you're thinking. We've got 10 acres and a lot of people don't have 10 acres. Will it work on smaller properties in suburbia? That's a good question. So let's go to Margie and Dan Terpstra's house in Kirkwood, Missouri. They have 0.6 acres, 18 times less land than Cindy and I have. And they're in the middle of a development. All their neighbors had the big lawns. And when they moved in, their yard was choked with Amur honeysuckle, bush honeysuckle. You know Amur honeysuckle, major invasive plant. So they removed that and they put in 75 species of native plants, including a water feature for the birds. Then they sat back and started to count the birds that have used their yard. And they've got 149 species that have used their yard, including 35 warbler species. Just to put that in perspective, we've recorded 8 warbler species at our house. So does it work on smaller properties? Of course it does. But what about your urban yards? Let's go to Pam Carlson's, actually it's Pam and Mike Carlson's house in Chicago. And I mean in Chicago, that tower back there is one of the towers at O'Hare Airport. Kennedy Expressways over here. She's got 1/10 of an acre, and she's not connected to any natural area at all. 1/10 of an acre is 3 times smaller than the average lot size in North America. It's a pretty 1/10 of an acre, all native plants. But she did the same thing. She got rid of her invasive species, put in 60 species of native plants, water feature for the birds, then sat back and started to count the birds. And she's up to 120 species of birds that have used her yard, including a woodcock. There's Pam's woodcock right there in Chicago. So if you haven't seen a woodcock lately, go to Pam's house. As of 2005, that was a long time ago, there were 40 million acres of lawn in the US, which is the size of New England dedicated to an ecological deadscape. Now, I know we need lawn to display our Halloween decorations, and we need lawn to display our status, of course. But what if we cut the area of lawn in half? What if we took areas like this and converted them into areas like this? I got this picture just a couple of weeks ago from Dan Gitman. I think he lives in Missouri. That was a big lawn, but he's recently, this planting is only 1 year old, is converting it to natives. Well, that would give us 20 million acres we could put towards conservation. And if we do it at home, we can create a new national park that I'm calling Homegrown National Park. And that will be bigger than the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Badlands National Park, Olympic National Park, Sequoia National Park, plus the Grand Canyon, plus Denali, which is huge, plus the Great Smoky Mountains. Add up all those parks, still less than 20 million acres. So Homegrown National Park be the biggest park in the country. We're going to shrink the lawn. What plants are we going to put in the area that is now lawn? Some of them have to be what I'm calling keystone plants. Remember what a keystone is? This is the Roman arch. The keystone is the stone in the middle of that arch. And if you take the stone out, the arch falls down. We're calling these keystone plants because if we take them out of our local food web, the food web collapses. Just 5% of our native plants are making 75% of that caterpillar food that drives food webs. 14% of our native plants are making 90% of the caterpillar food that drives those food webs. So think of the keystone plants in the ecological house that you're building as the 2x4s that are holding up that house. They're essential. They're the support. Your house is not going to stand up without it. You cannot build a house out of wallpaper. And that's what we've been trying to do for the last 100 years. You're not through building your house after you put in your keystone plants, but they're an essential step. So the question is no longer simply, are natives better than non-natives? Ecologically, they certainly are. But there are a lot of natives that aren't contributing all that much either. So really the question is, do we want to put the native species that are supporting the most pollinators and the most caterpillars, into our landscapes or not?
So, as he said, and we're going to start moving a little bit faster because we don't have much time left. I can't believe it. Plant for the birds. We're going to create layers of native vegetation, tall trees, understory trees, shrubs, ground covers, both deciduous and evergreen. I have a hard time finding evergreens that will work in my yard because most of the evergreens are big trees. So that's one problem area that I struggle with. Diverse plant layers, because they offer food and habitat for a variety of different birds and wildlife. We need to provide them with a water source. A bird bath is okay. You don't have to create a pond, because then you have to worry about keeping the water moving and mosquitoes and all that. Oh yeah, and put up bird houses. Help them. Although, I found a robin in the nest that the cardinals built last year, and she's just squished into there because she's a lot bigger than a cardinal. No matter how she's right outside the bedroom window, and so every time I'll move the a little drape a little tiny bit so that I can peek to make sure that everything's okay. She's like, I know she's staring at me. She's got eyes back of her head, like any mother. So habitat equals food, water, cover, and space, right? So we've got to provide that habitat throughout the year, and we have to account for the changing needs that wildlife have. So why are caterpillars so important? He just talked about this, and this actually comes from Doug Talmey's book. And because birds need so many caterpillars to reproduce, can you imagine that? To rear one clutch, they must catch 6,240 to 9,120 caterpillars? Goodness sakes.
Is that a day?
Total. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a lot. They need to live near a forest, right? So the best we can do is create a lot of diversity in our plant selection so they have plenty to choose from, so they find what they need. So choose shrubs and trees that support the caterpillars. We already talked about this, so I'm going to go through pretty quickly. So native plants, look at that. Oak trees, 534. Blueberries, 288. Asters and goldenrod, 115. Non-natives, crepe myrtle just has 3. Boxwood 1 and Nandina 0. So here's the comparison between the caterpillars on a white oak found in July 25th, 2014, compared to those found on a Bradford pear just the next day. Isn't that amazing? Don't look at me to be up there counting caterpillars, but I'll trust him. So attracting food that the birds love, the insects and spiders, is part of what we're talking about today. The biggest thing, my takeaway on this is that as long as you have a diversity of different types of native plants, you're probably going to cover it pretty well. But cedar waxwings and American robins, they love berries as a source of food. Many insect-eating birds switch their diets to berries just before migration because they need the fat to get them into the migration. Top berry producers. Remember, this is in the slide deck, so then I'll be putting this into the handout folder so you can download this. By the way, though, these PowerPoints are so big that you can't just open them in the Google Drive. You have to download them to be able to see them. But they have all this information there. There's my aronia. That's a chokeberry. The importance of seeds and nuts. Well, there you go with your goldfinches and your blue jays. I've had blue jays all winter long fighting over my backyard. And today I just was noticing a goldfinch having fun. That for them, you want to look at the seed nut producers. There you go again with the oaks, the hickory, beech, maple, birch. Birch has nuts? Oh, seeds. Coneflowers are great for their seed heads. And it's kind of fun to, I've seen winter over gardens of native plants, and they've got like a whole grouping of them, and you see these little seed pods fluttering around. Same with the goldenrod. They're actually kind of pretty in the winter. And then don't forget the water. They need access to water. Not only do the birds like to bathe in the water, but they need water to drink. And where are they going to find it if it's not in your backyard? That looks just like the nest outside my window, by the way. So they want habitat. And to provide habitat, they need bushes that have leaves and branches that are close enough together to protect them from other larger birds taking over the nest and taking over and eating the eggs. But they also need nesting material. That's where some of those, that's where keeping a messy garden over the winter comes in. So the bird cover equals shelter and nesting sites. Oh, they're getting really close to that baby bird. So plants that provide great cover, this is dense structure you're looking for, like the willow, the hawthorn. I don't know if my hawthorn is big enough to be dense yet. Hollies, of course the conifers, what's rubus? I forget. Nesting material like from milkweeds and cinnamon fern, native thistles, and asters. You'll see them as they go through the winter, and they provide. And what I did when I finally started cutting some of them back is instead of just chopping them down, I cut the seed heads off and let the seed heads stay on the ground, so that they continue to provide some either food or nesting material. So we're getting close, and I might just finish with this because this is really a great source of inspiration.
Birds are among the first to be impacted by environmental change. And unfortunately, studies today show that a lot of bird species are threatened due to climate change, habitat loss, and of course, herbicide use. Now, there is some good news, and there's one place where we can make a positive difference with our feathered friends, and that's in our own backyard. For every plant we place, for every one that we let go to seed, and for every plant that we don't spray, well, those can all make a difference for the better.
I often say that I really think that birds taught me to garden, and even though I didn't know that was what was happening at the time, when I first came here almost 30 years ago and I was clearing the land and getting ready to make gardens, there were all these birds all over the place, and I started to learn to identify them and engage with them. And I bought field guides and looked up who they were and what they were all about, and I realized I wanted more of them in the garden that I was going to make. So in order to do that, I kind of researched and found out what their needs were, and I found out there were lots of bird plants, but for different seasons of the year, different kinds of plants appealed to them. So they like some plants for nesting in the spring, and some plants that provided food for their young, and some plants that provided food at migration time in the fall, and plants like evergreens for winter protection from the wind and so forth. And so I started deliberately adding plants for the birds for all their needs in all the different seasons. And so in doing that, in making choices for 365 days worth of plants for the birds, I kind of accidentally ended up with 365 days worth of plants for the gardener too, and a 365-day garden. They taught me, and I'm grateful for that, and they continue to entertain me as well, so yeah.
Now, Margaret, if somebody wanted to become more involved with birds in their own backyard,
Yes.
what are some of the most important things for them to take into consideration?
Number one thing that you have to do is, if you want to have a lot of birds, you have to have a lot of bird food. And I don't mean in a feeder, I mean bugs.
Right.
So you got to grow a lot of bugs. And if you use chemicals, you're not growing a lot of bugs for the birds to eat. So you have to stop using chemicals, I think, number one. And I always think of what that Harvard biologist, the esteemed D.O. Wilson, said. He calls all the little things that kind of live in or near the soil layer the little things that run the world.
Yeah.
And he says, and I'm paraphrasing, he says, even he doesn't know with all his degrees what they do, but he knows without them we'd all be dead. Gosh. Not just the birds, but us. So we have to have the food chain right at the bottom really intact. We can't use chemicals, including fertilizers, and sterilize the soil, you know. So that, I think, is really, really important. And then we have to stop mowing, really, also.
You won't get a lot of argument out of some people
But
there.
look, I did, at least in one little area, right?
Right, right.
So again, so what I'm doing is I'm sort of making a bug growing area, an area where lots of things come into bloom and so forth. And there's also host plants for caterpillars earlier on that eat their foliage. And so there's lots of action up here, and the dragonflies love to come up here, and the bees love to come, everybody loves to come up here. So I think that's kind of, you know, what a gardener has to do first of all. Stop killing bugs and start growing more bugs, encouraging more bugs. With the pollinators, even though the birds may not eat some of them, like bees and so forth, which probably don't taste very good, the pollinators are doing a job that ends up serving the birds and small mammals and so forth as well, which is that they're pollinating, which is going to make seeds, which is going to make fruit and so forth. So they're helping to produce food that the birds and others may eat.
So once we put those plants in our landscape that provide a food source, and then we have a water source,
Yes.
There's still a lot of other considerations, though, to attract the maximum number of birds and keep them happy.
And one of those should make gardeners happy, which is that you don't have to be as tidy as you think you do, which is kind of great, right?
Yeah.
But seriously, don't clean up too soon. Don't treat the garden, especially in fall, when we're approaching fall and winter where there's going to be less food available. Don't treat it like you're vacuuming your living room starting at one corner and working all the way to the other, right?
Yeah.
But leave things up that bear seed, like some of these grasses that are near us, you know. Leave things up to benefit wildlife till the last minute.
So I have some slides here that run through combinations of which plants for which birds, but I want to draw your attention to these are things you can find online. That's why I'm trying to make all of you into researchers. So this actually was from yardmap.org, which I think has become a part of the Teresa, do you remember the name of the birding site that Wayne uses a lot?
eBird.
The Cornell ontological.
Yeah, it's the Cornell site.
Yes.
Yes, Cornell, I think, bought out Yard Map, so it's incorporated into that. But they'll go through, literally, you can go through and pick the bird that you want to, you know, what do they want to eat? So it'll go like for the Carolina chickadee, it wants various fruit seeds and conifer seeds. And it'll tell you the habitat that it wants. The same with the Carolina wren. Eastern bluebird. Tufted titmouse, I love those. They're so cute. American goldfinch. Indigo bunting. Have you ever seen one in our neighborhood?
Oh, no.
I haven't either. I've seen them out at Atkins. White-breasted nuthatch. Yellow warbler. Hummingbird. Hairy woodpecker. Downy woodpecker. And the red-bellied woodpecker, which has been coming around my yard a lot lately. Now, there's the northern flicker. Likes wild strawberries. Well, I've got a lot of wild strawberry that I use as a ground cover. So maybe I'll see a northern flicker one of these days. So the top ranking, we talked about keystone plants, and we've been talking about this a lot. By the time we finish, I'll have a test. What are the keystone trees? Oaks, cherry, willows, birch, and poplars. Poplar is also a keystone. So now, the other thing you can do, you can go to audubon.com and you can put in your zip code and it will tell you the same sort of information. Like I went to that and I pulled up some of these keystone plants and what birds would go to them and what they were, what were the attributes that would bring the birds. Because it's a tree, they have fruit, the nuts, butterflies, caterpillars. So these are other resources that you can easily find and spend oodles of time looking things up and finding things. That trumpet honeysuckle, that's basically what we have, right? Yeah. Did you know that American pokeweed is a native plant?
Yes.
I did too, but I sure hate it.
I think that's aggressive.
It is pretty aggressive and it's huge. And those berries, I have a Wheaton Terrier. And in the house we lived in before we moved into town, there was a pokeweed and I didn't know what it was. And she would go running past those and the berries would get on her. Boy, was it hard to get that pink ink out of her. So then you look at the bees. What are the top ranking plants for bees? Oh, bergamot, that's Monarda. Common boneset. I think it might have been boneset that was those white flowers that you asked about with the purple flowers. I think it might have been the boneset, the eupatorium. I think that might have been what it was. Then the rudbeckia, the black-eyed Susan. Purple prairie clover. Now, when I first designed my backyard, I overseeded the lawn with mini clover to get rid of the grass, basically. So what does clover do? It adds phosphorus, nitrogen to the soil. Yeah, it fixes the soil. The problem with it is that the last 2 winters, the clover has died off during the winter. And then all these crazy weeds come up, and I finally decided to do something about it. So those of you who come out next week, you'll see what I did.
I just want to mention about bergamot, monarda, bee balm.
Yeah.
I'm a little skeptical about that because I have lots of bee balm and hardly any bees on the bee balm. Do you guys have bees on your bee balm?
I get bees on mine, but when it blooms, there's a lot of other things blooming in my
Maybe
yard.
that's what, I see bees on other things, but
Yeah.
not on the bee. So anyway, I think it's a little bit overstated.
Yeah, no, I'll see lots and lots of bees on the goldenrod
Yeah.
through the season, and I'll see it on the asters. And then, and on the right, that's what the mountain mint looks like. I love mountain mint when it turns into that gray, silvery gray petal. And so here's a picture, sort of like what I showed you last week, of some of the herbaceous perennials that are especially good for attracting bees and butterflies. So you have your goldenrod up there, then you've got I have never tried turtlehead. I think you have some, don't you? Yeah. Dill. That's just very common. You can buy that. You can buy that right now. I mean,
Caterpillars on that.
yeah.
Every year that I've had parsley,
Mm-hmm.
you get the black swallowtail.
Yep.
Caterpillars.
Yep.
So
So
like, here's my little blob. How do they know they come every year?
I know. Yeah. Yeah.
Find it. Yeah.
And I swear that bees look for the same spot every year. They get mad at you if I discovered when we were putting the cover on our barbecue that they had built there's a honeycomb underneath that they had built, and I knocked it off and put the cover on, and this spring I was reminded, I gotta get the cover off because they were getting mad at me because they couldn't get to it. So that's the butterfly weed. Somebody asked me what that looked like. So that's one that has the pretty orange flowers. It doesn't get as tall. So it's really very nice in your garden beds because it'll only get about yay tall. Whereas the regular milkweeds will get huge sometimes. That's the swamp milkweed. That's a very pink version of swamp. Mine aren't typically that bright, pretty pink. The New England aster, I just bought a couple plugs of that. So there's all kinds of, so that's the bonsai right there. You can't see the leaves on it, but I'm pretty sure those were the, I
I
recognize.
think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sometimes
bigger.
join at the stem.
Yeah. And then you have the host plants. So there you see your black swallowtail butterfly with the carrot family. So that's dill and fennel is another one that they'll go to. The black swallowtail also goes to I want to call it zinnia, I bet that's not right. You know, it has the yellow flower right now. I forget the common name. That's why we pair up so that one or the other of us will remember. But so now we get to questions. And I'm open to questions, but before we do that, next week's field trip, or this Friday's field trip, is to Marilyn Reedy's home. Write down the address, it's 504 Bainbridge, here in Easton, it's over by the high school. However, last week, we had 9 people at 9 o'clock, and the rest of everybody showed up for 11 o'clock, and we don't have that kind of room at her house. So we need to go back. Everyone got the address? Okay, I'll send it out in a note beforehand too. But here were the original field trip times when I just broke the class up from the bottom up. So tell me for those of you where one time isn't going to work for you that you're in, tell me what you want to change.
So, at the 9 o'clock, Anne
and Harriet Ann are the same person.
Okay,
So I'm going to move my name, Lorraine Curry, over to Harriet Ann Rosenwald. And we'll go at 9. I did not go last week.
okay, what's your name?
Lorraine?
Lorraine?
No, Lorraine.
Lorraine. Oh, I see.
See, one of
I
you
see.
together. Yeah, we're neighbors.
Good, okay, so you're switching from 10 to 9. Okay, what about the rest?
Um,
Oh, just a second. So Karen Harris is going to 9 o'clock.
With Mark Harris.
yeah, that would be good.
Oh, okay. So yeah, those, I forgot you guys were the ones that split up.
Yeah.
Well, nobody's perfect.
I don't have, there are a lot of Harris.
I don't have the same last name as my husband. What was yours?
I'm barely Pat. I'd like to change to 10 o'clock, please. From 9 to 10.
Are you Carol Lee Patton?
Yes.
Okay.
You're going together.
You have a
Yes,
friend.
I wasn't gonna make a fuss over that, but the fact is that
Okay,
that time suits me better.
I'll be out of town if that makes one more space.
Annabelle is gone. Okay, now somebody on Zoom. Oh, Carla. Justin, did you see Carla's note on Zoom? Wait, just a second, I can probably get to it in the chat. Just a second. So Carla,
Oh, it just came through.
yeah, Carla
It just
to,
got here like this second.
so Carla to 10. Oh, okay,
Mark,
along with Mark.
he's not going. Mark's not going.
Okay, but Carla is going at 10. Is that right, Carla? I guess that's what she asked for, right? Not bad. Okay, great. Thanks, Carla. So Carla's at 10. Anyone else wanting to make a change?
I don't know that you made a change. I was down, well, I was late coming in, so I went with the 10. So if you want to even something out, I can come either time.
Well, it seemed like 9 was the time we needed to get more people.
I'll do 9.
Okay,
That's
so
fine.
perfect. Are you on 9 right now?
No, I was on 10 last time. I wasn't on anything last
Oh.
time because I was late to sign up.
Oh, okay, what's your name?
Linda. Linda Maxwell.
Okay. Okay, anyone else wanting to make a change? Yes?
I'm not on any of them, either, Jan paper, and I can do 9.
Okay. I think I did this before because last week there were a couple people, you signed up during the class, I think, right? Yeah.
Lynn,
Yeah?
I have a doctor's appointment at 1 o'clock in Annapolis. So can I go at 9 this week, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
It looks like, well, let's see. We've got 2 extra people.
She's down here.
Yeah, she's at 10.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we've got 2 people that have moved over to 10, so. Okay, I've got you down for 9 o'clock. So that looks like it's fairly even.
Thank you.
So those of you who are coming at 10, please stay at the street. Until the 10 o'clock time, because we'll try and get people moving and have them out by 9:50 or so. So there's a little time for the transition, but there's not as much that at her home. She doesn't have quite the structured walkways that Jenny had in her yard. So it's a little more difficult to have so many people at the same time. So anyhow, any questions as we finish, because we're going to lose the screen here.
I have a question. The folders that you were talking about, did you give out the folders the first class?
No, that's our Google, it's on our Google Drive, and it's a folder within Google Drive. I sent out an email probably on Friday that had the link. Justin, when you send out the recording, can you include the link to the Google Drive folder? Thanks. So, yeah, so you should be able to get it that way.
Okay.
And then once you find it, just bookmark it, so it's easy to find in the future, and you can go back to it without having to go searching through emails.
So actually, the link is already posted in the receipt for the class. I think another one
But
out.
people don't keep receipts.
But I'll take a look at it.
Yeah, so just keep them in the put them in every memo that goes out, and then that way people find us.
Is there a main street?
Did Justin
If you go
Did
down,
Justin put out the first class? I'm sorry. Did Justin put out the first class, the recording for it?
Yes. I think it,
And then
Okay.
the Google Drive link you're talking about, that's already this now too.
yeah,
so I think the easiest
Okay,
way
thank you.
is to go to the street that goes to the high school.
Yeah,
And then the next to the last street, turn right.
okay.
That's Bainbridge.
Oh, okay, that's easy.
yeah.
Good.
And for the people coming at 10, you may have a little trouble finding a place to park. So just maybe even park at the high school and walk.
True, well,
There's not much space there either.
it's school day.
Oh, it's a Friday, yeah, that's right. You'll find something, I'm sure. But she's, what's really interesting where she is, I just forgot her name. Marilyn, I wanted to say Megan, I knew that was wrong. But at Marilyn's house, it's that she's dealing with several microclimates. So she's got a shady spot that gets really wet, and she'll be able to talk to, we can demonstrate that issue that many of us have at some point and around our homes, and how she dealt with it. And then she also has a very bright, sunny front yard that she hasn't figured out what she's going to do. So with that, we might, as we finish touring around and see, she's got a mini meadow as well, and see all of the different things that she's done, we might kind of sit there and ponder what we would recommend for her to do in her front yard. So anyhow, well, thank you so much, everybody. It's been marvelous. I hope you enjoyed last week's field trip and that you're learning today and our sessions.
Thank
you. Thank you.
Very interactive, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.